Hey friends, David Miller. I'm a Los Angeles-based multimedia artist, and I'm making a vlog about David Lynch, who passed away earlier today at the age of 78. Lynch is one of my heroes. Maybe it's like 2 weeks ago, finished his audiobook, Room to Dream. It's on Spotify, and the way that biography breaks down, the first half is by a writer who's not Lynch, and very factual, and the second half of each chapter is him, what I think is off the top of his head, describing his memories and recollections and inner thoughts and feelings of the events of his life. And it's such a good book. I highly recommend anybody who's creative in any field give it a listen, because Lynch is one of those artists that I relate to so much. He's an INFP artist, of course. And INFP artists are really about knowing who they are and being idealistic in a world that doesn't breed idealism. And they all come at it different ways, you know. David Lynch, also a heavy practitioner of Transcendental Meditation, he dives within. And in that subconscious that he swims around, he finds bliss, kingdom of heaven, nirvana, you name it. And he is somebody, I'm speaking in present tense about David Lynch because it hasn't sunk in that he's passed, but he is somebody who could articulate his dreams, both good and bad, through audiovisual mediums, which is very, very, very difficult. I think one of the reasons why people would describe a flavor of something as Lynchian is because so few people could do it, and nobody had the exact same flavor as he had. Being an artist who is into that ethereal other world, I would watch things like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, and it doesn't make like literal sense to me, but it makes perfect sense. And people will say, oh, that stuff's weird, it doesn't make any sense, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you're thinking of it as somebody who is used to everything making sense. And as I'm kind of reflected on what overlap I have with David Lynch creatively, there's times where you hear like a knock in a building you're in and you know nobody's there. There's like a noise in the garage and you check it out and you don't see anything. I grew up thinking that all the time, like what really is it? And the truth is, you'll never know the answer to that. There's a lot of stuff in the universe that just does not have answers that you'll ever get. And it's a very interesting side of humanity to explore, I think. Probably one of the most unexplored parts of humanity is the fact that we're not going to know everything about our minds, our souls, our bodies. We never have in the duration of human existence. So I've been thinking about that kind of stuff a lot and writing songs about it. I have a song that's called Intuition Screams. I have You'll Never Know, which has the line about a noise in the garage that's empty and you investigate. If there's a reason, you'll never know. That's the way the song goes. I don't want to talk about myself too much. I want to talk about David Lynch. He obviously is a person who means a great deal to a lot of people, creative and non-creative, because we need something that is both light and dark, funny and serious, mysterious and plain, as something like the straight story is. We need our artists to be able to be free to explore every single facet of humanity, if it's emotional, parental, things like exploitation and disfigurement, like the Elephant Man, things that are, highly sexual, like Wild at Heart, and the dark elements of all the super evil, like, criminal figures that he has in his films. running down off the top of my head, my introduction to him, I watched Twin Peaks as a kid, at least the first season. Everybody agreed the second season was bad, and I didn't watch it after. I really just didn't like Bob as a character. I thought he was too scary for my 12 or 13-year-old mind. The second Lynch thing I would have gotten in contact with was probably The Elephant Man, because I worked in a rental house, a Blockbuster Video, and I thought that looked super interesting. And I'm going to have to come out and say that The Elephant Man is still my favorite David Lynch work, because it is so tactile, and it's about a history I'm really interested in, and the performances are so compelling, and the adagio for strings that he has at the end of the film is so moving. I easily have that in my top 5 movies of all time. And then I'm sure I saw Blue Velvet shortly thereafter, because a band, Populate Itself, who Clint Mansell originally was in, did a song called Pretty Pretty. It was written by Graham Crabb, not Clint, and Pretty Pretty has the lyrics entirely borrowed from Blue Velvet. I think they're all Frank Booth line too. But I was really interested in, I found that out, and I'm like, oh, well, I want to watch the movie and see if I can pick out where those words are. And to this day, I think I've seen Mulholland Drive twice. I recently saw Lost Highway for the first time. I and my son did half of Inland Empire, and then we shut it off. We were watching it simultaneously, but it was so long. And Inland Empire, being David's last feature film, it has things that I liked, but it had no script. It was done totally spontaneously. And I admire beyond shadow of a doubt, like the courage it takes to say, okay, I'm going to take this new technology, little handy cam that he was working with, and I'm going to try filming something in a whole new way. And when you're experimental like that, I mean, it's might be successful and might not. I just, in general, I think things that are experimental are better off in smaller doses, not stretched over a long period of time. And not specifically about Inland Empire, but artists who are experimental. I think Andy Warhol made a 10-hour film. I might be getting the details wrong. Yoko Ono and John Lennon made several experimental pieces together, music, and it's just, in a small dose, it communicates as much as the large dose does, but because we are all intuitive artists, and we don't just want to make a painting that fits on this wall, we want to make the painting to the specifications in our heart and soul and mind and body. So it might be a painting that's too big to then leave the apartment. That just might be the way it goes with artists. Wild at Heart recently watched for the first time. And then we've been doing a rewatch of Twin Peaks, my son and I. His works are very cohesive. And when you get to Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, and Twin Peaks itself, because there is a duplicate of Laura Palmer and her cousin, Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, and Inland Empire. The ideas of people like having a double or swapping spaces, it's pretty omnipresent. And if I was to break it down easier, it's like we have multitudes in us. Can we be more than one person? Can more than one person be us? What shifts do we make in our mind when we've done something like in Lost Highway, committed a murder, and we need to rationalize it in the most irrational ways? The one outlier from that whole period is the movie I haven't mentioned, but another one I saw maybe 15 years ago and rewatched about 3 months ago. And that is The Straight Story, which is a true story, and it takes place in Iowa. And it has an elderly guy getting on his riding mower and driving to see his brother. That movie, I don't think I gave it a good shot the first time around, but 2 or 3 months ago, whenever I watched it recently, I felt like I was being hugged by the universe in a way. I felt like it's so minimalistic, and it really breaks down us as people, and family relations, and it kind of reminds me of home because I'm from the Midwest and I haven't spent any time there in like 15 years, 20 years certainly. I moved out of Nebraska in 2002. And essentially I've never seen Dune. I left Dune off. I have never seen it. Dune is the one that I've not seen a shred of. And I intend to watch it soon, but watching the recent Denis Villeneuve, I'm going to mispronounce his name, but the recent Dune movies that came out, I don't want to be tainted by story elements I see in something else. And I know that David doesn't like that movie, and he didn't have Final Cut on it, and he learned a lot from it, and working with Dino De Laurentiis got him Blue Velvet, but I adore his works. I want to talk a little bit about his book, Room to Dream, because a lot of times you find out that your favorite creative heroes are equally, or if not more than, more interesting than their movie personas, the lives they lead. So I've gone deep into Guillermo del Toro's life because I'm making that animated film, but I also listened to Werner Herzog's audiobook about his life. David is a person who, his time in Montana and Pennsylvania and I believe Oregon or Washington, one or the other, meant a great deal to him growing up. The details he puts in the book are very lush. At one point, he found $100,000 in a bag as a kid, and I thought, is that D.B. Cooper's money that fell out of the plane? I looked it up. He found the money before Cooper left. But then I got thinking, is Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks named after D.B. Cooper? That's so strange. And of course he was, beautiful facts. He talks about the time when everybody in school, and he was like 5th or 6th grade, there was a rumor going around that you could do something to yourself and it would evoke this mysterious white fluid. And David says something like, and by golly, it worked, which I think is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. Me hanging out by the ocean, drawing and listening to my audiobook, and he starts talking about those early erotic experiences. In between Eraserhead and Elephant Man, he made money by doing a paper route. And I think he was making $200 a week or $200 a month, something like that. But he was doing a paper route and he was enjoying it because he had a really good system. This is him as an adult, by the way. This is him after working on Eraserhead for 5 years and getting it out in theaters. But by the time Mel Brooks hired him to do The Elephant Man, he was getting paid $200 a day. And it shocked him. He said he was going to do the makeup for his Elephant Man feature, and when he couldn't get it to work, it was one of the darkest times in his life. He said there's like 3 days that if it weren't for Transcendental Meditation, he would have committed suicide. And Mel Brooks is like, no, we've got a guy. We'll get a guy that'll do the makeup. You just direct. Just focus on your thing. Back to the paper route. One of his bosses in the book, he says, tried to put it like individual names in each paper. So now they had to go exactly where they're supposed to be addressed to. And David, in the audiobook, gets visibly angry, audibly angry at this idea. It's like, that's going to take so long. I have a system. Instead of being 1 hour to deliver all these papers, it's like hours and hours and hours. And the boss said, just do it. So he ignored his boss and he went and delivered the papers as is. And he got fired for doing so. You put artists on the pedestal, you put your heroes at this, like, they can do no wrong. You think in your head they've always been successful and always been winners at everything, and they never had to do crappy jobs, and if they did them really well, or blah, blah, blah. It's just not so. people you know and admire and respect for their creativity have to do other things in their life to survive. And I know for me, I DoorDashed, but I've also turned that into exploring time, mindless dreaming time where I come up with stories and ideas and think of problems to solve, time that you could use to listen to audiobooks and podcasts and just whatever it is. I mean, having a day job is not a sin, nor is it a complete barrier to you actually fulfilling your dreams. It's just funny to hear David Lynch go off on his old newspaper boss, though, because that would have been the late 70s, early 80s, whenever it was. Very amusing. The creative stuff in his book about the films, like the specifics of them aren't that important. He always says in his interviews in his book that ideas are the main thing. You have an idea, and if it's one you fall in love with, then you'll find a way to make it come to reality. And I strongly believe that. He says that transcendental meditation, going within, is a way that all of humanity would benefit from diving within and being closer to themselves and the unified field that binds everything in the universe. I strongly believe that as well. I've been trying some transcendental meditation recently. I don't really have the specific techniques at hand, and I hear from David that Maharishi Yogi technique is the one I should be following. I'm going to give it a shot in honor of him. I'm going to think about it over the next week. He talks about the women in his life that he's loved, and he doesn't go into like super great detail about how everything fell apart, but he was married multiple times, and one time he was already breaking up with the woman, but he married her so she would get, what she was owed as his essentially wife up to that point. Married her and instantly divorced her. The one thing, and it's not David talking about this, but it's the biographer speaking, where he was having his most recent child. Prior to that, he had told his partner that, why can't I be enough? Why can't, why do you have to have a baby? And he's already had kids. But this kind of goes back to Eraserhead, where having the art life in his mind leaves very little room for family. I agree and disagree, but what the biographer goes on to say is that in that conversation with his then wife, David said he needed to do his work and he didn't want to feel guilty because once a baby comes, everything is about the baby. And I should be more specific. He said he didn't want to be made to feel guilty because he has to do his work. And this is a thing that I think a lot of non-creatives or people who just sort of live like a regular existence don't understand, is that you have to get into a zone to produce, and that zone isn't something that's just like, okay, it's 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and then after that, I'm off and I'm available and free. I'm, not thinking about the stuff that I'm thinking about for my creative projects. I mean, this is probably the thing that makes me and David, besides our names being the same, makes us the most alike, is that I feel very creative people need to, it's who they are, and it does not stop anytime ever. You can take breaks and such, but if you're partnered with somebody who isn't that way, it's incredibly difficult to communicate that. I cannot answer your questions right now. I'm focusing on this. I'm not going to stop for supper, or I have to go away for this number of days to work on this project. And when I come back, it's going to be another project. And I can tell you for certain, for the vast majority of creatives in the world, especially in the modern era, when you stop, when you take a break of days, of weeks, whatever, and just be a normal person, you're going to build up resentment because you're not expressing what's really inside you. You're not making new things. You're not getting it out there. And at the same time that you work on whatever big project you're working on, you have to be like setting up the next one. So there isn't this like dead space where you're not making any money, or you're not making the film, or you're not making the music, or it's a treadmill, and some of us are wired for it. David Lynch certainly was, and other people who aren't or don't understand that about you, it's really bad for all involved. Because not only my resentment for not being me, for being suppressed, is now aimed at the person I should be the most in love with and who has been the most supportive up to this point. I just want to wrap it up to David was a funny guy, and he was so calming to hear speak with his weather reports and his anecdotes and his pace of speaking and the way his hands kind of like reached out and touched the ethereal world. His animations and his paintings, I guess if you kind of understand that he came from the painting world, then his movies don't feel like pop movies as much as they are paintings of a different stripe, and they don't need to conform to all the rules that a studio might say a painting is supposed to have. I just came up with all this off the top of my head. I'm sure I'll have deeper thoughts about it. I really appreciate the man. I feel like, when people reflect on art history, they're going to name him in the same reverence as somebody like Vincent van Gogh or Da Vinci or Shakespeare. Like, he's going to be up there with the all-time greats of their times, and I'm gonna miss him a lot. I look forward to viewing the few films I haven't seen of his and rewatching the ones I haven't seen in a really long time, like Blue Velvet, and finally getting to the most recent season of Twin Peaks, which I missed entirely. So, Godspeed, David Lynch. Best of luck to you in your own creative endeavors, whatever they may be. Talk to you next time.